No one believed what he did with his fortune after the janitor spoke that day, and no one could have predicted it would all begin with a single word. Anthony Wexler, a millionaire with a reputation carved in stone and sealed with wealth, wasn't used to silence. He was used to boardrooms echoing with his commands, assistants scrambling at his slightest nod, and deals closing with numbers too large for most to imagine. In his world of luxury and control, uncertainty wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unacceptable. But on that gray Tuesday afternoon, uncertainty hit him hard, in the most humiliating way possible. He had flown across the ocean for this. A historic real estate deal in a quaint European city involving a vast family-owned district about to be sold off due to years of financial struggle. The opportunity to buy such an emotionally significant property at a fraction of its worth was rare, and potentially worth tens of millions. Everything had been arranged except one thing. No one arranged a translator. Anthony, used to the world adapting to him, hadn't even considered it. His assistant stuttered when she realized the local delegation didn't speak English. She mumbled, "Sir, they're asking if we brought someone to translate?" Anthony stared blankly. He had no translator, and suddenly neither money nor power could buy him words. He glanced across the polished wooden table at the family, generations of business owners sitting with folded hands waiting. The room filled with an uncomfortable quiet. The tension was thicker than the velvet curtains that lined the windows. And for the first time in years, the millionaire felt small. His entire fortune couldn't help him if he couldn't speak. His assistant fumbled with a translation app, trying to break through the language barrier. But the tech failed miserably. The patriarch furrowed his brow. A younger man whispered something to his sister. They began to stand up, maybe to leave. Was he losing the deal? Was his trip for nothing? His heart pounded. He couldn't lose this. Then from the far side of the room, where no one was supposed to be listening, a soft voice spoke. "I can help." Anthony whipped around. A woman stood in the corner, dressed in a plain gray janitor's uniform, holding a mop, her gloves still damp. She looked hesitant, unsure if she'd overstepped, but her eyes were confident, clear, sharp. She stepped forward slowly and repeated, louder this time, "I speak both languages. I can translate if you want." A janitor? Anthony blinked. Everyone in the room turned to look at her. Her name tag read Elena. He had walked past her that morning without a glance. Now, she held the key to saving his entire investment. "You're fluent?" he asked, unsure whether to believe her. "Yes," she said simply. "Completely." Time paused. Anthony, the millionaire who never trusted anyone, suddenly had no choice. He nodded once, slowly. "Okay, translate, please." And just like that, the janitor became the most important person in the room. But who was Elena really? And why would a janitor speak 5 languages fluently? What secret had been quietly mopping the floors this whole time? Elena stepped forward with a grace that didn't match the creaky old mop she'd leaned carefully against the wall. The change in the atmosphere was immediate. The family, moments ago, ready to walk out, paused and exchanged glances. When Elena spoke in their native language, her voice was warm, articulate, respectful. The tension dissolved in an instant. They smiled, first out of relief, then genuine curiosity. It was as if a locked door had been quietly opened, not with force, but with understanding. Anthony watched stunned as this janitor, this woman no one had noticed, flawlessly translated his pitch, his concerns, his intentions. The meeting that had been seconds from falling apart was suddenly back on track. Elena stood between them, not just as a bridge of language, but of trust. And oddly, Anthony found himself speaking with more care, more humanity than usual. He wasn't barking orders. He was explaining, listening. Something about the way Elena looked him in the eyes as she translated made him slow down. For the first time in a long time, his words felt like more than tools. They felt like truths. As the conversation deepened, Anthony's usual focus on money began to blur. The family wasn't just selling property. They were letting go of a legacy. A bakery that had been open since the 1800s, a courtyard where weddings had taken place, apartments that housed generations. Through Elena's voice, Anthony felt that weight. And something unexpected happened. He stopped negotiating like a businessman and started responding like a human. After the formalities ended and the family left for a short break, Anthony turned to Elena. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" he asked. She smiled, wiping her hands on her uniform. "Languages were my first love. I studied linguistics, but life had other plans." Anthony tilted his head. "And now you're here mopping floors?" "I clean. I listen. It pays enough," she replied simply. "Enough?" The word hit Anthony harder than expected. How could someone so gifted, so obviously educated, settle for so little? He looked around. The marble floors, the antique chandelier, the priceless paintings, things that spoke of old money, new money, and fortunes passed through generations. Yet here was someone with more talent than half the executives he paid six figures to, wearing secondhand sneakers and pushing a cart of supplies. He was intrigued, maybe more than intrigued. But as the family returned and the deal headed into its final stage, something shifted. Elena paused mid-sentence, frowning slightly. She turned to Anthony and whispered, "They're hesitating. They're saying they don't trust your offer fully. Something about integrity." Anthony stiffened. "What do you mean?" "They think you're only here for profit, that you don't care about preserving what matters to them." He narrowed his eyes. "What did you tell them?" Elena looked at him carefully. "I haven't yet. I wanted to ask, do you care, Mr. Wexler? Or is this just another trophy for your empire?" For a moment, he didn't know how to answer. No one had ever asked him that, and certainly no janitor had dared to. Before we dive deeper into this journey, if you enjoy stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul, hit the like button, subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories too. Anthony Wexler sat back in his chair, stunned. The question echoed louder in his head than anything Elena had translated. Do you care? In his world, no one cared whether he cared. They cared about performance, margins, deadlines, profit. Integrity? Sentiment? Those were luxuries for people who couldn't afford to win. But as he looked at the family sitting across the table, weathered faces, trembling hands holding heirloom documents, eyes filled with both hope and fear, he felt something shift. Not because he suddenly turned into a saint, but because Elena had seen through him. And for reasons he couldn't explain, that mattered. He cleared his throat. "Tell them," he started, then stopped. He looked into Elena's eyes, then back at the family. "Tell them I want to preserve the buildings, not demolish them. I'll restore them, keep their names, honor their history. If they agree to the sale, I'll make that promise legally binding." Elena translated, slowly, carefully. The room was quiet as the patriarch leaned toward her, whispering something only she could hear. She turned to Anthony. He said, "If that's truly what's in your heart, he'll sign. But only if you look him in the eye and say it yourself." Anthony nodded. He stood, walked around the table, and extended his hand. The old man stood as well. Their eyes met. No translator needed. "I promise," Anthony said, and the man with trembling fingers reached out and shook his hand. The deal was done. When the family left the room, leaving behind signed documents and tearful goodbyes to a century-old legacy, Anthony remained silent. Elena walked back to her cart, quietly putting her gloves back on. "You just saved a deal worth millions," he said, almost like an afterthought. She shrugged. "I didn't save anything. You did." He laughed, though not fully. "I don't usually have moments like that." "I figured," she said. He looked at her differently now, not as a janitor, not even as a translator, but as someone whose presence had challenged him more deeply than any board meeting ever had. "Why are you doing this job?" he asked again. "Honestly," she glanced down, "because I didn't finish school. My mom got sick. I had to work. The degree didn't feed us. This did." The weight of that sentence hung between them. "How many languages do you speak?" he asked. 5, fluently, and I can understand 3 more if I have context." Anthony's jaw tightened. The weight of wasted brilliance pressed against his chest like guilt. He thought of how easily the world discards talent when it doesn't come in the right package, when it's wrapped in janitor's clothes instead of business suits. And he realized something else. Elena wasn't asking for pity. She wasn't asking for help. She had power, and she used it when it mattered most, not to benefit herself, but to help 2 strangers bridge a gap neither could have crossed alone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek business card. "I want you on my team," he said. "I'll double whatever you're making now." But Elena didn't take the card. Not right away. Why? She asked. Because I was useful today, or because you actually see me? Anthony hesitated. No clever answer came. Just silence. Then finally a small smile. Because I see you now, and I don't want to forget what that feels like. Still, she didn't reach for the card. Instead, she said something that stopped him cold. I don't need charity, Mr. Wexler. I need purpose. And in that moment, for the first time in years, the millionaire realized he didn't know how to give that to anyone, not even to himself. The room had grown quiet again, but not with tension. This time it was reflection. Anthony stood frozen, card still in hand. Elena's words settling into his chest like an anchor. I don't need charity. I need purpose. It echoed with more force than any business rejection he'd ever faced. She hadn't just refused an offer. She'd held up a mirror to the very thing he tried to bury for years. The truth was, despite his wealth, his private jet, his luxury penthouse, Anthony had no real purpose beyond the next deal. No cause, no mission, only numbers and wins. But Elena, she had just reminded him of everything he had lost on the way to the top. He slowly tucked the card back into his jacket, not insulted, but humbled. What do you want to do? He asked her, sincerely this time. If money weren't an issue, what would your life look like? Elena leaned against her cleaning cart and thought for a second, then answered, I'd create a place where people like me, people with talent but no connections, no wealth, could learn, grow, and be seen. Not pitted, seen. Anthony blinked. He had expected a job title, maybe something small, but what she described felt bigger. You'd build that? I'd try, she replied. But dreams cost more than mops and minimum wage. He chuckled under his breath. Trust me, I know. Then something stirred inside him. Not guilt, not pity, inspiration. The kind he hadn't felt since his very first deal, back when the stakes weren't millions but everything. As they exited the hall, Anthony's assistant rushed over with contracts in hand, eyes wide. We did it. Congratulations, Mr. Wexler. That's a $30 million acquisition. But Anthony wasn't listening. He was watching Elena return to the janitor's closet, like nothing had happened. No fanfare, no thanks, just back to work. Later that night, as his private car rolled through the quiet cobbled streets, Anthony stared out the window at the silhouettes of old buildings. He wasn't thinking about property value. He was thinking about Elena, about people who get overlooked, about voices with power, hidden behind utility carts and stained uniforms. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't just thinking in numbers. Back in his hotel suite, Anthony opened his laptop. He clicked through a folder of ongoing projects, then paused. One file was labeled Wexler Institute Proposal. It had been an idea pitched to him a year ago, a vague education initiative for branding purposes. He had rejected it. Too costly, too soft. But now the idea felt different. He opened the document, stared at the empty header, and started typing. Not a foundation, not a donation. A program fully funded, independently led, and built with a single mission: to find and empower the hidden talents no one was looking for. He didn't know the logistics. He didn't know if it would make him a cent. But for the first time, he didn't care. 2 days later, back in the city, Elena was pushing her cart down the same long corridor when a staff member rushed over, out of breath. The American? He left something for you. She blinked, confused. Who? Mr. Wexler. The staff member handed her a sleek, sealed envelope. Inside, a letter handwritten in perfect black ink. You gave me something I can't pay for, so I won't try. But if you ever want to build what you spoke of, I'll follow your lead. You choose the location. You choose the people. And I'll write the checks. No conditions. No logos. Just impact. It was signed simply, A. Wexler, and tucked behind the letter was a blank check. Elena stared at the check for a long time. Her hands trembled slightly, not because of the amount, which was intentionally left blank, but because of what it meant. For most of her life, her value had been measured in hours worked, floors cleaned, and buckets emptied. She had learned to live quietly, unseen, and grateful for just enough. And yet here was a man who had everything: money, power, freedom. And he was offering her something she'd never been given before: trust. Not in exchange for labor, not for service, but trust in her vision, her voice, her power to lead. She folded the letter slowly, placed it back inside the envelope, and slid it into her locker. She didn't rush into anything. She went back to work, but everything felt different. Her steps were lighter, her silence purposeful. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something inside her had. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine again. Not daydream, not escape, but plan. A week passed. Then another. Elena didn't cash the check. Then one morning, she took the train across town and stepped into a rundown community center that had been closed for years. Its paint peeled, its roof leaked, and the walls echoed with ghosts of forgotten programs. But Elena saw what others wouldn't. She walked room to room, whispering to herself in multiple languages, testing the acoustics, envisioning classes, workshops, voices. She imagined desks filled with immigrants, single parents, ex-cons, people passed over, people like her. And in that silence, she made a decision. She emailed Anthony. The subject line was short. Let's build it. 3 words. No proposal, no resume. But she didn't need them. Anthony replied within the hour. Where do I send the team? Months later, the transformation was underway. Elena refused to put her name on the building. This isn't about me, she said. It's about everyone who's never been invited in. The center became a language and leadership institute, free, open to all, staffed by volunteers and professionals who had once been janitors, waiters, construction workers, farmhands. People whose talents had gone ignored simply because no one had bothered to ask. Anthony visited quietly at first. No entourage, no press, just him, standing in the back, watching Elena walk through the halls with purpose. She knew every name, every face, every story. She greeted in 5 languages and listened twice as much as she spoke. One afternoon, a young man with a thick accent approached Anthony in the hallway. She says you helped start this, he said. Is it true? Anthony hesitated. I funded it, but she started it. The boy smiled. She told me, I'm not invisible. That's the first time anyone ever said that. Later that night, as Anthony prepared to leave, Elena caught up with him at the entrance. She didn't thank him again. She had already done that once, and once was enough. Instead, she said, do you remember when I told you I didn't need charity? He nodded. Well, this still isn't charity. It's partnership. You gave me capital. I gave it purpose. Anthony smiled. Best investment I ever made. Elena chuckled. Even better than the old district? He looked around the center. The laughter, the learning, the lives changing in real time. By a mile. Months passed, and the institute bloomed beyond anyone's expectations. What began as an abandoned building became a living, breathing force in the community. Inside its walls, stories were being rewritten. Immigrants learning the language that had once locked them out of opportunity. Young women coding their way into tech careers. Older men rediscovering passions they had buried beneath decades of survival. And Elena? She didn't just run the place. She anchored it. People came not just to study, but to be seen by her, to hear her say, I believe in you, and know she meant it. She never touched the full amount Anthony had offered. She used only what was needed, built with care, and made sure every dollar served someone's future. She refused to build a marble office or hang gold plaques. Instead, on one empty wall at the entrance, she placed a simple sentence, painted in 5 languages. No one here is invisible. Anthony visited less often now, not because he lost interest, but because he didn't need to oversee anything. The project had taken on a life of its own, led entirely by the people it was meant to empower. It no longer needed him to guide it. It needed him to believe in it from a respectful distance. One afternoon, he received a letter, not an email, not a text, but an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from a young woman named Lyra, one of the Institute's first graduates. It read, Before this place, I had never spoken in public. Last night, I gave a speech in 3 languages. I start my job next week in a place where my name is respected. I wanted you to know, Mr. Wexler, your money didn't change my life. Elena did. But your belief in her made all of this possible. So thank you for seeing someone most people overlook. Anthony sat with the letter for a long time. The man who once chased fortune as his only goal now found meaning not in profit margins, but in stories like this. Quiet, deeply human, and infinitely more valuable than anything he could deposit in a bank. Later that week, during an executive meeting at his company's headquarters, his CFO brought up a new development project. We'll make millions, the man said. We've got the leverage. It's a done deal. But Anthony didn't answer right away. He was looking out the window, thoughtful. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. Tell me something, he asked. Who lives there? What do they lose if we build? The room fell silent. It was the first time any of his board members had heard him ask that question. Meanwhile, back at the Institute, Elena sat with a young man in his early 20s, translating his poem into English for a small open mic event. He smiled nervously, unsure if his voice was strong enough, his words good enough. Elena placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and whispered, They are, you are. That evening he read it aloud. His voice shook, but the crowd stood and applauded. In the back of the room, unnoticed, a familiar figure watched with a quiet smile before slipping out unnoticed. Anthony had built towers, bought islands, and negotiated with billionaires. But nothing ever felt like this. Not even close. The years that followed quietly reshaped Anthony Wexler's life, not in headlines or flashy announcements, but in the way he thought, listened, and acted. The Institute became something of a legend in certain circles, not because of its funding, but because of its results. It didn't carry Anthony's name. It didn't even feature in his official portfolio. But it transformed more lives than any of his skyscrapers or resorts ever had. The irony wasn't lost on him. The most meaningful thing he ever built came not from strategy, but from a moment of panic, and a janitor with 5 languages in her back pocket. Anthony no longer chased acquisitions with the same hunger. Deals still happened. He was still a millionaire, still surrounded by luxury, but they felt different now. He began evaluating projects through a different lens. Who benefits? Who is left behind? What story will this money tell when I'm gone? These weren't questions the old Anthony ever asked, but now they were the only questions that mattered. He stayed in touch with Elena, though she never let their conversations drift into sentimentality. She remained grounded, practical, and focused. There's always more work to do, she'd say. And there was. With her leadership, the Institute expanded to 2 more cities, then 5. And eventually, countries outside the U.S. began replicating the model. Each center different, each adapted to local needs, but all rooted in the same truth. Talent is everywhere. Opportunity is not. Then, on a quiet spring morning, Anthony received a call. Elena had been invited to speak at a global education summit. She didn't want to go. I'm not a public figure, she said. I'm just a girl with a mop and a mission. He laughed. You're the reason thousands of people believe in themselves. That's more than a mission, Elena. That's a movement. She paused. Will you come? I wouldn't miss it. At the summit, Elena stood on stage, not in a suit or designer dress, but in simple clothes, like she always wore. Still the same woman who once wiped down floors no one saw. But as she spoke, the audience leaned in, captivated. She didn't talk about hardship. She didn't ask for pity. She told stories of lives turned around, of second chances, of what can happen when someone is seen and believed in. At the end, she looked directly at Anthony, seated quietly in the front row. I used to think that power belonged only to the rich, but I was wrong. Power belongs to those who use what they have to lift others. And sometimes the greatest wealth you can share is belief. The crowd stood in ovation. Anthony remained seated, tears quietly in his eyes. That night, as they walked through the city, he asked her one final question. Elena, if you hadn't spoken up that day, if you had stayed quiet, where do you think I'd be now? She looked at him and smiled. Probably still rich, but maybe a little more empty. He chuckled. Fair enough. She nudged him playfully. Don't worry, I'd still be mopping your mess. He laughed fully now for the first time in days, and under the streetlights of a city that once held silence between them, they walked forward. 2 people from different worlds, united not by money, but by meaning. Because sometimes the richest thing a person can give is the chance for someone else to rise. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, share this video, and tell us in the comments. What part of this journey moved you the most? There's another story waiting for you, and it might just change the way you see the world. Thank you so much for watching, and see you soon.